I don't hear anything.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Witchcraft and Voodoo. This is episode 2 that we're doing today. I'm Sable Aradia.
Hi, I'm Lilith Dorsey.
And we're going to talk today about syncretic religions. So when I watched the last video, I realized that I'd done a lot of the talking. So I figure I'm just going to hand things off to Lilith and let her start. But before we get started, we have some news and announcements to make. Unfortunately, they're not the greatest news. So yeah, what was that?
I just want to let everybody know my priestess in New Orleans, Priestess Miriam of the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, they had a fire on February 1st, and now they've had to relocate. So there's a benefit in New Orleans this Sunday, which is April 3rd. I don't want to get that wrong, at the Hotel Storyville. Or if people just want to make a donation to the temple, there's a GoFundMe page, and there's also voodoospiritualtemple.org. She's nonprofit. People can make a donation. So we're going to talk about syncretism, and it's funny that I started talking about the temple there because I think in a lot of ways New Orleans is a syncretic city. There's a lot of different traditions that came together there. You can hear it in the food and the music and other things like that. So in a lot of different ways, the religion has become very syncretic there. In many ways, people know that Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau was also a devout Catholic, and there's a lot of stuff that she did in her workings, you know, that went through the Catholic Church there. And then there's also a heavy influence of Haitian Vodou there, and a lot of those are also aligned with the Catholic tradition. And for me, I mean, I think there's everything from someone just has a statue of a saint in their house, and they honor that saint on the feast day for the Catholic saint because that's how it's been done for hundreds of years. And that's what they were used to doing, and that's what the tradition says, to people who really practice both faiths side by side. I mean, I think there are a lot more people don't think of them as necessarily conflict to include a Catholic image or a Christian image in a voodoo ceremony. And a lot of times in Haiti, they'll actually have a Catholic priest come and do a certain part of the mass or the rites, and that will be incorporated before or after the voodoo ceremony. So, and the same thing is true in Santeria. A lot of times people will use Catholic saints or, you know, herbs that are traditionally used in the Catholic Church for different saints, which then translate into Orisha. So I think, you know, a lot of times it was a case of convenience. You had to go to the store and get what they had, and they didn't have a statue of Shango, but they had a statue of Santa Barbara. So you could take that statue of Santa Barbara and you could, you know, give it offerings that you would have given Shango. And that way also it was a way of protecting yourself, not just by, you know, honoring the Orisha or the Loa as you might, but also if somebody came to your house, they would think you were just practicing Christianity. So it worked on a whole bunch of different levels.
Right.
So I want to hear what you have to say about witchcraft. I'm excited about this.
Well, yeah, I guess when we speak of something as syncretic, right, it involves a variety of different influences that all come together and become something else, right? It's not the things that it came from. It takes those things and combines them in a different way, right? So we talk about eclecticism, and that's different, right? Because eclecticism is everything kind of maintains its own piece, and it continues to be what it was before you brought it into the collective, right? So,
right
now, I've been arguing. I don't know. I put a piece on my blog at one point on it, and we do a lot of theological discussion in my household because I live with both my high priests, right? So we talk a lot about faith at the dinner table. And okay, so Wicca is really a very eclectic. It came from eclectic sources that I think also come together in a syncretic way. And one thing, it's like the basis of it is the Western esoteric tradition. So stuff like ceremonial magic and the Rosicrucians and stuff like that, right? coming together to join with British in particular and European in general folk magic customs, right? And then it throws in a dash of, I think, right, that it borrows actually a fair bit from the Anglican Church, which is not something that most pagans discuss. And when you look at people who are talking about the origins of Wicca, they never say that. But it's almost a guarantee that the founders of Wicca were, at least in their childhoods, involved in the Anglican Church based on the time period in the area, right? And I think that when I was told about something called the Sarum Rite, which is a variation of Anglicanism that looks very Catholic, but it follows a year wheel, right? They have 7 sort of stations in their year wheel, and it's not exact stuff like there's a very Samhain looking rite of death that happens on Good Friday, for example. But I think that that also influenced Wicca in terms of its theology, right? Combined with Margaret Mead's theories on the witchcraft trials and the idea of Wicca coming from the mystery traditions of Greece and other places in Europe that were kind of changed and passed down, right? I don't know about that. I think that's probably more likely a conscious reconstruction than it is a actual passing on, but I might be wrong. So these are things that I think came together. And then when Wicca came to North America, right, we started also syncretizing bits of Aboriginal beliefs, right? Which is why reclaiming Wicca looks a lot different from British traditional Wicca, right? And of course, about that time, the women's spirituality movement got started. People saw stuff in Wicca that talked about goddesses, and they, you know, this was combined with sort of a more wanting to have a more feminist outlook on things, and that too became part of the tradition. So those are the major influences that I think that Wicca came from. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think it's interesting that you bring up, Margaret Mead. I think, because I'm an anthropologist, so I got to jump on it, bringing up Margaret Mead. Because I think she would probably agree with you that it was an eclectic thing. I mean, if she were around today, her and Gregory Bateson took the camera out and came and looked at a Wicca ceremony, I think they would agree with you on all your points, but especially this sort of reconstructionist, excuse me, kind of idea of putting things together. And I personally have witnessed the influence of what looked very similar to a lot of Anglican beliefs, in Wicca ceremony. So I'm really glad you brought that up. I feel like if I said that by myself, people would be like, what does she know about these things? But I grew up in it wasn't an Anglican church, but I grew up in a Lutheran school. So there was a lot of, sort of alternative Christianity kinds of things that I got fed. So I can see the structure and some of that being very, very similar, and it's funny because I used to do, Isaac Bonowitz used to have me sit in on his ritual design class a lot of times because we would have fun, bouncing ideas off each other and things like that. And I think that there's a lot of things there that work. So, and I think that's a lot of the basis of syncretism. If we see something that's really working, that there's a desire to incorporate it. Now, is that cultural appropriation? I don't know. That's a whole nother discussion, but I think there are a lot of things where people can, I don't necessarily think the Christians think we're culturally appropriating, although maybe they do, but, I think they're just happy, really.
So what would you say then are the major influences of Voodoo in particular and your branch of Voodoo, in general, and then your branch in particular?
Well, we're influenced obviously a lot by indigenous tradition, and that varies with each particular thing. If somebody is a Santero from Cuba or Puerto Rico, they're going to have a lot different kinds of knowledge. But also in Santo, which is more properly called La Regla Lukumi, what you do is you go back to Cuba, you go back to, the original line. So it goes back for, hundreds of years. It's even if you look at the literature, people were going back, even from Cuba to Africa in as early as like, the late 1600s. So we're talking about, like, as soon as people got here, they turned around and started going back there to make sure the traditions were still pure. So in a way, there's a devotion to these things, but there's also new things that are coming in. There's a lot of, you know, again, depending on what house you're in, really, you know, somebody like my house in New Orleans, when I first started, which is over 20 years ago, we had two Santeros that were there drumming. One was, they've both passed now, but one, he wrote a book called Santeria, and his name is Luis Nunez, and he was a dear friend. And you know, I think that because of that, you know, he might be playing his rhythm for Legba, and some of the rhythm for Elegua drifts in, because they're both guardians of the crossroads, and they're both, you know, going to open the door and the pathway to what's going to come next. You know, so by bringing that to the table, then that's what he had. But in generalized, yes, there's been a Catholic syncretism, and it depends. Like in Trinidad, you get a lot of Chinese things because you had a lot of Chinese people that were there. You know, if you look at my priestess's husband, Ashwan was an Obeah man from Belize. You get a lot more indigenous tradition from Belize, you know, and the practices going on there than you do, you know, here. So a lot of influence.
Well, lots of different things coming together, it sounds like.
Yeah, and then some people, even like an Orisha like Oya, some people say that she's white buffalo woman. So there were people that saw the commonalities between her, this kind of shape-shifting, this kind of powerful female energy, and they conflated the two. You know, I mean, people probably didn't start talking about the connections until the New World, obviously, but now that we see them, we can honor them.
That makes sense to me. Obviously, Wicca has a bit of a reputation for making those kind of connections too, which tends to not be popular at the moment.
I think sometimes you have to understand what it is you're talking about. I mean, I've seen sometimes that people will invoke 20 different gods or goddesses that they've never worked with before, or for before, I almost said, which is probably more proper. It's like inviting 20 people you've never met to a party, you know, like, why are they going to stay there? You know, who do they know? What's going to happen? Do they like each other? What's going to happen?
I agree with you. There's a movement among some Wiccan traditions not to invoke deities from different pantheons, and I see the logic of that. But I think it's cool as long as you're pretty sure they're going to get along with each other, you know. But yeah, you have to kind of be, I agree, you have to be aware of who they are, even if you think of them as more a part of an archetypical aspect of the human psyche. You still have to, you know, like if you're going to get, I don't know, if it's going to work, right? If the juice is going to flow, right? Then you've got to make sure you're not having forces working against each other. So, or if you're more a believer in the, you know, personality and agency of deities, then, you know, obviously they have personality conflicts just like we do, right? So.
Yeah, I used to do, we would call it north-south cross-training. I used to do these transpossession sessions with Diana Paxson, and we would do Norse deities and you know, different deities from the Afro-Caribbean tradition and the, you know, or Afro-Brazilian tradition. So what we would do is there would be a time for Freya to come in, and then later, you know, after Freya did everything she wanted to do, and we gave her flowers and her honey and her amber and all of that, then we would have the time for Oshun, and Oshun would come in. We'd give her flower and her honey and her amber, and then we'd be able to move forward. But we never would have done something where it was like, oh, we're going to have a party and invite these two really strong, powerful deities at the same time.
Well, yeah, I can imagine, you know, both of them are primary goddesses who are used to being shown respect as the visiting monarchs that they are. So, yeah, I mean, they'd probably feel pretty miffed if one was ignored in favor of the other. So,
yes. Yes.
So in general, do you think that syncretism is a good thing? I mean, you mentioned problems with cultural appropriation. Let's, I don't know, do you want to talk about that? Like, is this a
Well, like I said, I think it's about knowing the energies, entities that you're working with, and knowing whether or not in that tradition is that something that's okay. You know, I mean, I have seen certain cultures, again, as an anthropologist, I've seen certain cultures where, okay, I can go to somebody who's of the Hindu faith, I can buy a Ganesh, I can put the Ganesh in my house. That's okay with them. But if I talk to somebody who's of, the Lukumi faith, and I say, can I buy an Elegua and can I put an Elegua in my house? They're going to tell you, no, you can't do that, because that's not how these things work. That's not what happens. It's not like just going to the store and buying something and putting it up in your house. There's much more that goes into it.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you gotta have some idea of what you're doing, and in some cases, it would be, I think, disrespectful to just kind of go and seize aspects of other people's paths, and then oh, I like that statue. So on the other hand, it can be a thin line too, because sometimes people call. Like I mentioned last time, that I felt very much that I don't know if you're having the same experience, and I wonder if you are, but I've seen a lot of reaching out, which I personally think, but I can't presume to know, right? I think that the Loa are kind of reaching out to other pagans, and they're trying to understand how other pagans do things because they recognize potential friends. Right now, if I'm not an anthropologist, right, but I read a lot, right. I've got a better education than my certificates might indicate, right. And one thing that I've read is that the Loa tend to be very friendly towards people who are outsiders in general, or people who may not oppress peoples and whatnot, right. So I wouldn't say pagans are oppressed, but we're definitely outsiders, and I think they recognize natural allies there. What's your opinion on something like that?
I mean, I think there's more of it coming into the culture. There's more of it. When I started in the pagan community, like half the time they wouldn't even let us have drumming. So I think that there's a way in which there's more people coming to the traditions. And for us, like, okay, I am a daughter of Oshun. So that means everywhere I go, I'm a representative of Oshun. If I show up at a pagan event, then Oshun is representative of the pagan event, and she gets to see what's going on through me. Not really like in a possession way, but like more in a primal core kind of way, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Because once you get dedicated to that goddess, you're always a representative of that goddess, and she uses her energy, through you, and, can whatever. Anyway, so I think there's more people that are coming out through the drums, through the dancing, and through initiation too. I mean, when I started 20 years ago, there were no pagans that were, sort of outsiders, but within the pagan community, that were coming to the Afro-Caribbean traditions to get initiated. And now there's a lot. There's a lot. And there's a lot of those rhythms are out there. A lot of those, names are out there. A lot of those images, it's gone way beyond somebody just saying, oh, you have really pretty beads on,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. I like it when things come together. I like syncretism in general. I am aware of the issues of cultural appropriation. In Canada, we see it a lot with dealing with Indigenous customs. There's a lot of, it's we're stopping it now, right? As people become more aware, but you see
Sure.
little white girls running around in chieftain headdresses and things, and people get really mad, and rightfully because they have no idea what that symbolizes, and they therefore don't respect it. So I'm aware of those issues, but at the same time, I personally think that to some degree syncretism is how religion is born. I don't think there's a single religion in the world that just grew up you know, magically there it is all of a sudden. I think that most of the time we borrow ideas from our neighbors, or those ideas influence us, and it happens in both directions. It's never in one direction, right? So in general, I like it, and you know, I like to see the exchange of ideas where it happens.
No, I think it can definitely be a good thing. Like I said, I think as long as everybody moves forward respectfully, I think that's good. I think that, I mean, all traditions are evolving. I agree with you on that, 100%. I do think that cultural appropriation happens, like you said, not just among Native people, certainly among the African American community, there's a lot of cultural appropriation, and like, to me, it's one thing, like I said, if you try and, understand more about Elegua, or maybe light an Elegua candle or something like that, not so you'll, get a job or get laid or something, but just to sort of better understand, what the energy is about, then someone who is, like I said, setting it up and, trying to use it for ulterior motives and enter into some, a friend of mine says, you don't walk up to somebody you just met and ask them for $500, like that's not going to happen, and it's not going to work, and they might get angry or upset, or, who knows what'll happen. It probably won't be great, and you have to know what it is they want. I know a priestess. She went and she threw a very expensive coral necklace into the river for Oshun, and then was so angry that she didn't get what she wanted immediately. And I said, well, who told you to do this? Like, where did this come from? What, did you have divination? We're really, really big on divination. And by, again, a trained professional, there's a system of these things, Is it a good thing if I decide to throw this really expensive necklace into the river? Or maybe should I go and try and initiate in the way that's been set up for me already, and then thereby learn what to do to bring me the most highest happiness and good and proper path?
I like what you have to say there. I think that makes a lot of sense. You don't walk up to somebody you just met and ask them for $500. It's kind of rude. Yeah, and you don't come into a visiting monarch. You don't go into another monarch's court and then not do whatever their appropriate customs are of respect either. If you don't know, then you do your best to find out. If you can't find out, then you apologize profusely as you're doing it and say, in my land, this is really respectful. I really mean no harm. I hope you'll take it that way, right? So, yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right. People should do the research. I've had so many people come up to me. I had one woman, I was doing a workshop and I had a candle lit, and she ran up and she dipped her hand in it, and this festival had dogs, and she like put the wax on the dog, right? And I'm like, what is happening? She didn't say anything. I was like talking to somebody else who after the class, and then she comes back the next year, and I said, did you do that thing with the dog? What happened? She's like, it eats underwear. It just like ate all her underwear and lingerie and everything like that. I was like, well, maybe next time. She's like, I just thought I was supposed to do that.
Okay, then. Well,
yeah.
I hear that one. Yeah, we're prone to that, right? I see that a lot at different events. People. Again, we were talking last time about how people are, they get divine inspiration, or what they think is divine inspiration, right? And sometimes that's a really good thing, but yeah, sometimes it's, and discernment is good.
Oh my gosh, I was at a ritual once and somebody did an invocation to the goddess, and this guy steps up and he goes, the goddess hears you and loves you, like just from out of nowhere.
I've been there. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
Okay.
that's somebody who wants to be the center of attention, trying to take
Oh
their
yeah.
opportunity to do it. Is what I generally think. Yep.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was like hitting his people. I was like, go get him. He like walked into the middle of the circle.
Oh no. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. People are entertaining. Yes, yes, yes. No, I think syncretism's a good thing. I do. I mean, especially like I said, in the instance where people were using a statue to march that through the streets, because if they'd marched the real elements and symbols of their religion, they would have been, killed or persecuted. I mean, people are still persecuted for these things. So it's very difficult. And when and I think that's really where it's coming from. You can have a respect without putting on a headdress and an afro or something like that. I mean, this doesn't have to be nutso, like we can have respect for a tradition and talk to people. This is definitely, talking to people is easier than ever before, so you can contact and connect with people and, find out things and, from a reputable source, and incorporate those things in a positive way. But yeah, I mean, it's been done for hundreds of years, so we can't start really getting upset about it now.
Yeah, I can't argue with that either. The cat is out of the bag in a lot of different ways, and as much as you might prefer things to go back to the way they once were, they're not going to. Life has changed, right? So you got to kind of work with what you got. So, and is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, in my opinion, just as we have to adapt to the times, if our deities are going to continue to be beings we turn to, right, then they have to adapt to the times too, right? So
Sure.
I don't think they remain static. I don't think that they are exactly like whatever history textbook said they were. And that's the other thing. You're an anthropologist, right? So
Yeah.
you're aware, right, that history is always our best guess based on the information we have at this time, right?
Sure.
Margaret Mead genuinely believed what she was writing to be the case. Everybody else around it believed it too. It was the scholarly theory, and it's only later that it has turned out that she was mistaken on a lot of things. But this doesn't mean that the current theory is any more accurate. We might find something entirely different that will change our current perspective. It's just our best guess right now.
Sure, it's just what we've found and what we've tried to figure out up until this point, Although, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think that this age of Wikipedia and, things like that has certainly taken an interesting turn for things, I mean, at least when you look at Mead, not necessarily about some of the things about, Celtic stuff, but when you look at her things in Bali and stuff like that, I mean, she was there, Now we get people writing about indigenous cultures that I feel like have never seen some of them.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I see a lot of that too. And I don't know. Yeah, Wikipedia is a good case in point, I think, because it's a blessing in many ways that I can just go to Google, type in whatever subject I want, and get a general basic outline, right? But in some cases, it can be completely, like it's. For instance, it seems to me like currently every paganism entry on Wikipedia was written by Greek Reconstructionists. It's all very much weighted that way because these are the guys who, got their crap together. And after that one Wikipedia director there who was deleting all of our stuff was outed, right? They're the ones who got organized in fixing it. But I find that Wicca is really underrepresented. I mean, like it's not, I don't care other than we know that it was really influential in the modern pagan movement. So we really need to hear some of that. And it's not there because the people who were doing that work don't want to hear about that. That's not the story they want to tell, right? So who writes the history books, right? Who writes this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I was looking up something on Islam, right, a couple days ago. I was trying to understand, which traditions tended more towards a literal view than others, and it was completely obscured. It was so thick in the, scholarly language of the history of the development that I couldn't discern between theological points at all. I had no idea, based on that, which branch of Islam had what opinion on anything. So, I mean, like, I wasn't, I don't want to simplify it to that point, but at the same time, it was just a quick reference for something I was doing. And, I don't know, right? I see what you mean about the perspective. Obviously, to the people who wrote the entries on Islam, the history of where the different branches came from and why they diverged was very important to them. Right? So, but more than the theological basis of what each individual group thinks. You find that when you're researching Catholicism too. If you look for Catholicism in general, it says that, there was this split. The church was started here, and there was this split with the Orthodox Church back when, but it doesn't really tell you how Catholics understand things like the Immaculate Conception, for example. You would have to know to look that up separately, and it's a major theological point. So, yeah, I guess in a lot of ways you just have to know what questions to ask, but how do you know if you don't know?
No, that's very true. And I don't know, I feel like on some level, more information isn't necessarily better information. So the thing that I really don't like about Wikipedia is that, like, if there's a mistake up there about me or you, we can't fix that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we're a primary source, right? If somebody did an entry on Lilith Dorsey, right, and they said that you were, I don't know where you were born, but they said you were born somewhere else.
Hawaii. No, I was not born in Hawaii, but I like that idea.
Exactly, right. And you couldn't go, you're factually mistaken about this particular issue, because I'm Lilith Dorsey and I'm telling you I wasn't born there. Right? Yep. And they'd be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter what you say. You're not you're a primary source, so what difference does it make? Well,
yeah. I just don't think that. There was a time when, I said to a friend of mine, the same with the $500 friend, I was like, I would not have thought 25, 30 years ago that the opinion of, 500 people would be more important than the opinion of one scholarly person. Not necessarily more important, but more people are going to get the 500 people opinion, It's going to be hard to find that one scholarly person, and maybe they're right and maybe they're not, but it's just a different way of looking at things, and it's really changing who we are. And I think for us, it's important as religious people and scholars, because what we're getting is, not necessarily more helpful.
Yeah, the tyranny of choice, right? There's so much information out there that it's hard to sift through it and figure out what is more accurate than another. Sure. There used to be a, scholarly consensus that people would go to. They'd say, okay, well, you're right involved in it, so what's the deal? And now it's like, well, 500 people say you're wrong, but you know what? I see how the news is reported. 500 people can be really wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, just because people believe that that's what it is doesn't mean it is, right?
No, that's very true. Very, very true.
I don't know. It looks to me like we're just about at
time.
Just about the end of what we have to say about syncretism. Is there anything that you want to add before we call this a day?
No, I think that we said a lot about syncretism, or at least scratched the surface until we hear what people have to say.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I agree with you. Next time, which, shoot, I don't have my calendar handy here. Just a second here. The 4th and the 11th. So the next time will be April the 11th.
The 11th, yes.
I believe we had agreed to discuss initiation on the suggestion of somebody who heard our show. So I'm looking forward to that. And perhaps you can one last time give us the information about where people can get involved and contribute in helping your priestess's temple get back up and running and stuff.
All right. The voodoospiritualtemple.org, that's the website. People can go there for information about the benefit, for information about the GoFundMe, to leave a donation. And thanks a lot. I want to thank you, Sable, for coming up with this idea for the show. It's so much fun. I can't wait to do the next one.
Well, thanks so much for, being so enthusiastically a part of it. It's turning out to be just as fun as I hoped, and I love talking to you, and I'm looking forward to doing it again in 2 weeks. This will be great.
Yay. Bye, everybody. Read the
Everybody,
blog.
blogs, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.